Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. It's so lovely to be here, and thank you for the warm welcome, and it's wonderful to be back in New Zealand. It's been a wee while since I've been here. Before I start, I'd just like to acknowledge my descendants, my Ngāi Tahu descendants. I want to acknowledge that they are standing behind me as I speak today, and I just want to know that they are with me. I also like to acknowledge all educators who are in the room and the people who have influenced my life to be here, and the people who have taught me what I know. I don't stand here alone, I stand here with the people who have given me their gifts of education. I also want to thank NZPF for being brave enough to bring me back. I really appreciate that, and I'm alumni to you. I have been an NZPF member in the past. I'd like to thank Andrew, my husband, who accompanies me pretty much everywhere around the world so I can do the work that I do. I also want to thank Core Education. They're my partners here in New Zealand. They're helping us to spread the word of new pedagogies for deep learning, and I'll start calling that NPDL for short, so you know we've got another little acronym for education that's going to help change the world. And then I would like to, most importantly, thank the 38 schools here in New Zealand who have actually started doing this work and who are changing the world already. So if you're an NPDL school person, can you stand up so I can see who you are and where you are? All right, thank you, and a big clap for them. New Pedagogies for Deep Learning is a global organisation. We started about 4 years ago where we started to look at what is going on in the world, and we knew things weren't going so well with education. New Zealand is a long way ahead than a lot of other countries, but we knew we had a lot of problems as we were thinking about what do we need to do next. Let me just make sure I've got my technology going. We wanted to look at how we could build the knowledge across the world as to what actually is going on and how can we shift outcomes for our kids. So we got together a whole group of global leaders who were thinking about this. We sat in a room and we started to chew on what was going on and thinking about what's happening for our kids around the world, what's happening for teachers, what's happening for leaders. And so we sat and we thought about what can we do, and we thought we need to build a knowledge building network. We no longer can tell people what to do. We no longer can ask people what's the right thing to do. We have to figure it out together because we didn't know the answers to some of the problems. So we started working with, first of all, 7 countries. So we started to work with Finland. They now have about 400 schools who are working with new pedagogies for deep learning, and they're starting to figure out how they can combine competencies with curriculum. And you'll have probably heard stories about how they've shifted their curriculum to being more competency-based, but what they've really done is they've aligned their content with their curriculum. We've also got the Netherlands. They have a system kind of similar to here where they have boards of trustees, but they don't have boards of trustees for just one school. They have them for groups of schools. So they're kind of a little bit of a disparate situation too, where they have to do it individually. So they're starting to join together, and we have about 50 schools who are working on this in that country. We moved to the States, and I can say that they are actually starting to turn their heads around in this direction as well, which is kind of exciting for me. We're starting to work with 5 states there, and their biggest sort of issue is that standardization. And we can see what 30 years of standardization has done in the US. We now have a president that reflects that. So that's my one message. If I give you anything today, don't go down the standardization route, because otherwise we'll end up in the same situation. So I think the US, they're really starting to look at what's going on and thinking about what do we really need to measure, because what we measure is what we think is important. In Canada, we have over 500 schools who are working with us, and we're really trying to figure out what are the system conditions there that we can shift that really are going to make a difference for our kids. Move across the Tasman, we have 3 states who have been working with new pedagogies for deep learning: Tasmania, Victoria, and Queensland. Just last week I was over in Queensland, and we were talking with most of the schools in the northern region, and it was in Maroochydore, unfortunately, on the Sunshine Coast, and had to have a bit of time talking there with them, and they are really flying. They've got high schools who are now not having year levels. They're having students who are actually opting into what level of learning they need to be in. They're creating their own assessments that reflect what they know, and they're able to show what they can know in a way that shows what they want to show, rather than it being a standardized test or a standardized assessment that everybody has to show what they're doing. Uruguay. Uruguay was a really interesting case because we started off there 10 years ago where every single student got a laptop. But unfortunately, getting a laptop wasn't enough to shift the culture of learning. So they came to us about 5 years ago and said, so we've got no change, but everyone's got technology. So that's when we figured out it's got to be the pedagogy that has to change first. So they now have 400 schools, and they're going countrywide with new pedagogies for deep learning. And what's exciting about them is they had their conference 2 weeks ago, and they had over 1,000 people there plus their Prime Minister. So what's happening is we're seeing a movement of people across the globe who are really starting to figure out that it's pedagogy that's driving the change. Pedagogy through a systematic approach and a way of thinking about teaching and learning that is making the biggest change for our kids. Hong Kong, they've just joined us, Michael Fullen and Joanne Quinn, my two business partners. They are over there next week. They're going to be talking to the new schools that are coming on board there. And so what we're seeing is that each of the different areas around the world are really starting to figure out how we can shift learning for everybody. In New Zealand, I said we have 38 schools who are doing this work. And as I go through this presentation, I'll talk a little bit about what they're doing, because in your current situation, you can start to change the world from within. You have the right legislation already. You don't need to do so much to change, because it's not going to be about the government. This is about you guys, it's about your schools, it's about your community, and it's about your kids. So the purpose for New Pedagogies for Deep Learning is really quite simple. We want all of our kids in the world to flourish. We want to live in a world in the future that actually we want to be alive in. When I'm old, I want to have kids who know what to do in the future. You've heard people talk about technology. You've heard the way the world is going. I actually live across the road from the building where Alexa lives. Who knows who Alexa is? Alexa from Amazon? Okay, so in my house, I have a little Alexa. I talk to her when I walk in the door. The lights come on, the oven goes on. I can get milk ordered from Alexa. I can do whatever I need. I live that world now. So what I want to do is that the people who are behind the design of that, I want them to be human. I want them to think like humanitarian values. I want them to be able to collaborate and think, and when they're doing that, I want them to think about me as a person who's the end user of that. I don't want robots who don't have that humanitarian value. So for me, the most important thing is I want kids to be able to flourish in this complex world with that humanitarian thought behind them, because otherwise, we're going to be taken over by the AI, and they will decide how we're going to be. So for me, the most important thing we can do with kids now is to help them to be human. First British woman in Parliament over 100 years ago said exactly what I'm saying today. What the point of education is that we can collectively work together to create a better world for us all. Somewhere along the line, we kind of got off track and we thought it was about checking the box. We thought it was about teaching the little minute pieces of life. We thought it was about creating different ways of looking at education, and it's an adult construct that we have subject areas. Kids don't wake up and think, yeah, I want to go and learn about a math content. They want to learn how to do things with math. They want to learn how to be. So for me, it's like breaking down some of those barriers and looking at the competencies we require across the curriculum to enable us to learn about what we need to be as learners as we go. So when I talk about learning now, I say that learning is really only three things. Learning is knowing who you are, how you fit into the world, and how you can contribute back to humanity. And that is it. Because we make it so complex, we make it so hard, we think we have to do all these fancy bits all around it, but the reality is if we're not a good person, we're not going to be able to contribute to the world, and it doesn't matter how many degrees we've got. We can go to great heights as an individual, but actually nobody really cares about that. What they care is, did you do a good thing for the world? Did you contribute something to the world? And what did you do? And at the moment when we do that pass-fail thing that some of the other speakers have talked about, we're actually not helping anyone to be that very best person they can be. So for me, it's about helping every single person to reach that point where they can be the best they can be. And I'm sorry, my machine is not working. So for me, then, it makes sense that everything we measure should relate to that. And currently, is that what we're doing? Are we currently measuring everything that helps us to understand who we are, our language, our identity, our culture, who we are, how we fit into this world of ours, and then what we're doing to contribute back? Most of our assessments, most of our situations that we live in, it doesn't do that for us, does it? Do our testing, do our current regimes, is that doing that for us? You can respond. No, okay, good. So, our traditional systems, they are not helping us. They are one of the biggest barriers to our system change. So for me, it's really, really important to think about how can we shift some of those barriers. So I talk about things like making what's important measurable, not what's making measurable important. And I think about bringing humanity back to education. And that's been a journey for me. I admit sometimes I haven't always done that, but I've learned as well. I've been out in the world and I've seen, and I've come back to say, what we have here is pretty amazing, so let's keep it. And let's expand on what we have and let's grow it and show the world just how amazing and creative our Kiwis are. I'm going to tell you a little story about a couple of people. a town called Depthvale. Deep learning, get it? Depthvale? Deep learning, Depthvale. You can laugh if you want to. And it's Clover Primary School. I say elementary when I'm in the US, but primary school here because we know what that is. Imagine the school, it's in Depthvale. Picture your school in your town, your little primary school, your big primary school, wherever it is. Think about you've got a teacher. This one's Ms. Monica. She's one of those teachers in your school that wants to do everything right. She questions every single thing you do. She drives you absolutely stark raving mad. But she's a wonderful person and she's really trying to get everything right. Across your school, you've got a Ms. Melda who does the opposite, who's at the other end of the school sort of saying to you, we've already tried that. We've already done that. We've been full circle and we're doing it again. We did that when I was 12. And then we have Kaya. Kaya is that little girl in your school who knows the right thing to do. She is the most beautiful kid. She's the one that flourishes. She's the one that the system was made for. She's the one that can do everything right. She sees the best in everybody and she can do no wrong for anyone. Then I want you to meet Lucas. Lucas is new to the school. He doesn't speak English. He kind of struggles. He isn't so good at his communication, things like that. He hasn't always, doesn't seem to like school. Has anyone got a kid like Lucas in their school? But he's also very respectful and caring. He's also pretty creative. He also really tries hard. But what do you think we think about him? When we talk about him, when we give a generalization, which side of the coin do we talk about him on? When we're thinking about how we have to measure him, what do we usually say? We usually say he struggles in school. We usually say that's the thing we talk about the most. Is that right? Would you say that that's kind of where we tend to put, because we think we have to measure the academic side and not the other side. So what I want to really share today is that that's not the right case. It doesn't have to be that. We can share the most important parts of our kids. And we think that Lucas is going to be less likely to succeed in school because he's not necessarily as academic as maybe Kaya is. And is that fair? Is that equitable? Is that inclusive? It's not, because reality is inequity exists in our school system and in every single school system I have ever worked in and around the world. I have yet to see a school system that measures on equitable outcomes. And by equitable outcomes, I mean measuring the whole student. Every system that we're working with, we're struggling to figure out how to do this. So you are not alone. I am working with OECD at the moment, and we're looking at how do we measure learning in 2030. They are looking at the learning progressions that we have written for new pedagogies for deep learning and the 6 competencies that I'll talk about in a minute to figure out, is that what we really want to do? Now, listening to every single keynote speaker up until me, that's what they're talking about. You're talking about measuring the things that really count for humanity, yet we haven't shifted our school systems to be able to do that yet. So we're all working on this together, so we need to work together to be able to do this. So no matter what you change, no matter how nice we are, no matter how much we love our kids, no matter what we do, unless we shift what we measure and how we measure, we're not going to get the equitable outcomes, the inclusive outcomes that we want. Does everybody have to be the same? When we think about assessment, often we say it has to be the same outcome. Well, I've learned a really big lesson in life that if that's the case, then I want you all to wear my glasses. You have to see the world through my lens, and it doesn't work like that. When I first wrote all the tools that we sent out to the world to use for NPDL, I said, I want you to use them as they are, because that way then I can measure and say, are they working or not? I was slapped so hard across the face by every single country, it doesn't work in our context. So what I learned from that was that in essence, we want the same things, but we might describe it in a different way. So we have to look at the language we're using. We have to look at our cultural context. We have to think about the way we're doing it. So you guys, you want creative leaders in flourishing futures. So what does that mean? To have creative leaders in flourishing futures, how are we going to get that? I read on your flyer this statement. You want to do that within the tension between the system and what's going on in your schools. So you really are trying to figure that out, and I have not heard anyone say they don't want to do that. I've heard everybody say you want to work together, you want to partner, you want to make it work, And yes, there are history stuff. There are things that have gone on in the past that none of us like. But let's be honest about it, we've tried. So think about back to Ms. Melder. I said there was that teacher in the school that's always got those objections. We're going to have to face some of those objections front on. We're going to have to talk about the white elephant in the room, or the green elephant, or the pink. Wearing the nice creative outfit from one of our New Zealanders. Thinking about, we've got big lines of division sometimes. Now, we're Kiwis, we're only little, we're only small, we should not have to have these. We have lines between our students, we have groups, we go and talk to groups of people. We've got to get those lines gone. We've got to move them out of the way because we're actually all people. I've probably been in each of those situations except government, and I doubt I'd ever get elected to government because I drink too much. So it's not possible. But there are lines between all of us, and we don't need them to be there. I think there's probably, I can honestly say, working in the ministry, I probably met one person who didn't want the best for kids. Doesn't always come across like that. But generally, people want the best. I don't think I've ever met a principal who doesn't want the best for kids. But we just have to dig deep and find out, how do we get rid of that? So if we want creative leaders and flourishing futures, we've got to get rid of those lines. We've got to get rid of talking to each other in a different way. We've got to change the way we behave to each other. And it's not just about the ministry changing. It's not just about the principals changing. It's not just about the schools changing and the parents changing. It's not the kids. It's all of us. All of us have to take responsibility to get rid of that stuff. And I talk about that as new learning partners. Pedagogy is no longer the sole responsibility of teachers. It's up to us all. We all have to take responsibility for this, and we are all learning partners. All of us, each person in this room is a learning partner with me, and I'm a learning partner with you. These are our new teachers. These are the people, if we listen to them with our taringas, they will help us. They will help us to understand what it is they need. And when I listen to the children, I hear something different. I've interviewed probably over 4,000 kids in the US, and not one of them has said to me a teacher has asked them what they want to learn, that they've heard. They probably have been, but they've actually heard it. So we are miles and miles ahead of a lot of other places. I know that in every school I've ever been in New Zealand, that is not the case. So think about where we are in the continuum of development of learning, and we've got learning partnerships really established. Think about our relationships with iwi. Think about when we design learning, how we include our culture as part of what we do. Some work I was doing in Hawaii, I was interviewing some parents, and they said to me they don't want their kids to learn Hawaiian. And I said, why wouldn't you want them to learn that? Well, nobody else speaks it. And I remember hearing that 30 years ago here. So we are a long, long way ahead in our understanding about who we are, what matters for us, our identity and our culture and our language. So it's really critical that we keep that. These are our new leaders. These are the people who are going to be leading our world, and we want them to be able to be innovative, to be creative. And we have to be able to describe it to them, what that looks like, and give them the opportunity to do that. And guess what? These are our new learners. We are the learners now. We're no longer the fountains of all knowledge. We know that. Technology is not pedagogy. Pedagogy is the driver, and technology is the accelerator of the pedagogy. It is not the other way around. And I think you've heard that really loud and clear from the other speakers as well. So where do we start? What are we going to do? How do we make this happen? As I said, we've had 8 countries working on this, 7 and plus our new one, Hong Kong. So we've got some ideas, and we've got some real success to share with you, because I'll tell you why I think it's working. Firstly, because no one had to do it. You know what that feels like? No one had to do it. It was people volunteering to do it, people trying to figure this out. And I think every teacher in their heart wants the right thing for kids. When we all became teachers, we wanted to make sure we were making a difference in the world. And I think sometimes we get systematized and we lose that passion. And it gets tiring and it gets hard because we feel like we've got these system conditions. One of the things I think my job is to do in this world is to free people up for realizing that even within your system conditions, you can change the world. You don't have to wait for somebody to say, yes, you can do it. You can do it right now. And I'm trying not to be one of those speakers that gets you motivated, then you run away and don't do it. Like that one that Mr. Fox was talking about yesterday. But the first thing you want to do is you want to find out, what does success look like? And nobody can tell you what success looks like except you and your community. No one. So in New Zealand, you have the most amazing system in the sense that we have 2 different curricula. We have it in Māori and we have it in English, and they are not a direct translation. So when you leave school, or when you leave kura here, you can graduate effectively or leave school in either language and you're still seen as being educated. You can leave university with a degree in Māori or in English and you're still seen as being educated. The curriculum is not the same. So then when I say that to other people in other countries, they just about fall over. Well, how do you do that? How do the teachers know what to do? So because they ask the kids what they need to learn and they create the context around it. So then I say, so in Sweden, they have a different curriculum. Do we believe that they actually are teaching their kids and when they get to the end of it that they've done enough learning? Do we believe that they actually have got enough to get a degree? Yep. What about in Finland? Do we think that their curriculum's getting them that? Yep. Do we think that in the US? Maybe. Do we think that in Canada? Yep. Do we think that in Australia? Yep, we do. So what I'm saying is it's not the curriculum that counts. What is it that counts? People, humanity, it's the competencies to work together, live together, and learn together. So I talk about collective cognition, that it's only through all of us working together are we going to spark each other's brains enough to create the new knowledge we need to change the world to be a place we can survive in. And it's only through our kids, because I think sometimes our brains are too stuck to be able to see past ourselves. So we need our kids to be that innovator. We can't be giving them worksheets. We can't be teaching them stuff we already know. If we know the answer, why are we teaching it? So, success for me is figuring out what do you want your kids to be, and then what does it look like? So far, most countries think about success as based around knowledge and content. Now, I am not giving content a bad rap because it's really hard to think deeply about nothing. You've got to have something to think about before you start learning about it. You've got to have some content somewhere, eh? So you've got to think about what that is. So for me, I think about it as the deeper learning outcomes, not just deep learning. I think about the deeper. So for me as a Kiwi, and you'll understand this, I think about self-understanding. Who am I? My language, my culture, my identity, my people, my whānau. Magic word whānau. Who am I? And I've got tools that help us think about that. Then I think about knowledge. What knowledge do I need to be me? What knowledge do I need to understand me, my world, and how I can contribute back? Competency. What are my competencies? How am I going to collaborate? How am I going to communicate? How am I going to think critically about all this information I have? What am I going to do with it? And then how do I connect all of those dots in my environment, among my people, among my city, among my world, among my life? So all of those together are what I consider the deeper learning outcomes that I want from my world. Now that's me. That might not be you. You need to decide what it is for you, and you are right in the middle of a beautiful conversation that is rich, that might give you those answers to decide what is really important for you in this country right now. Happy to help, but that's what's important for me. When I think about that, that on its own isn't enough. Why do you learn this? Why do you have this? What's the purpose of it and what's the point? It's so we can contribute. It's so we can give back, so we can do something with it. Because, as I said, individual attainment, nobody cares about that anymore. Who cares whether I've got a new car? Who cares whether I've done something or gone on a trip? Nobody cares about that. They want to know, have I done something to help you guys? Have you done something that's contributed to the world? And you as educators know that. So for me, for meaning and fulfillment in my life, I need to know all of those bits. I need to be able to contribute, and that gives me my buzz. That gives me my humanity. That gives me why I get out of bed every day and why I want to work. And that is attainable for every kid, special education, second language, whatever it is, because your success is not my success, it's that child's success. So when you're thinking about measuring, it does not have to be the same. And when I look back at national standards, I think that's where we went wrong. We said it all had to be the same. And that's the piece that I think we got wrong. I think we were trying to get it right, thinking about, okay, so we know there's a progression of learning, we know what we're trying to achieve, but actually we got it wrong by saying it had to be the same. You agree? Maybe? Okay. Right. So what do we do then? So when we start thinking about deep learning and change, I have to think about it as a system. So you know the butterfly effect? You do one thing somewhere, it happens somewhere else. And sometimes you don't always want that to happen. So we have to think about everything as a whole. So one thing happens, something else happens next. So what we did was we got together and we created the global team. So that's myself, Michael Fullen, Joanne Quinn, and we now have 3 or 4 or 5 other people who are helping us. But at the time, it was a really small group of people, and we really had to think hard about what we were going to do. We also had the help of Dr. Jane Davidson, another Kiwi, so you'll recognise some of the stuff, hopefully, because it's coming from people who know you and understand you, because we're part of you. What we did is we thought about, what do we need? What kind of tools do we need? And the biggest thing we thought about is we're not going to tell anyone what to do, because we learned the hard way, you can't do that. And what we needed to think about is how can we help learn together? And what is a way to create collective cognition and give that space to do that learning together without it being really prescriptive? And then we knew the other part was that we had to have a collaborative inquiry cycle. Now, New Zealanders, we know the collaborative inquiry cycle. I have to tell you a funny story, just a quick diversion. An American said to me, "Can you introduce me to New Zealand? Because I think they could use the collaborative inquiry cycle." I said, "It came from New Zealand." Okay, it was. Right, so we decided that we thought that we wanted character, citizenship, collaboration, communication, creativity, and critical thinking. Those are the things that are going to help us flourish in this complex world. Not math, science, reading, technology, engineering, etc. We need those, but we need to know how to bring those to life through being able to work together. So we said those are the things that really count. That will help us to create a world that we all want to live in. Yeah? So once we did that, we said, right, we need to describe what that is. We need to say what that is, because my picture of collaboration might be different from yours, might be different from yours, might be different from yours. So let's give a general description of what it might look like. So let's write that up. So we did. And I'll show you an example of that. We have a collaboration learning progression that has 5 dimensions and describes what we think it looks like. Then we said, that means we're going to have to design learning in a very different way. So what would be the elements of learning that we think are really important? So we said, pedagogical practices. What are the pedagogies that bring deep learning to life to be able to get those competencies going in every kid? So we said pedagogical practices is important. We said learning partnerships. Who are the learning partners? Remember I said earlier, pedagogy is no longer the sole responsibility of the teacher. So who are the people who can help us to do this work? Then we said learning environments, 24/7, 365, all of the time, seamless between home and school. Now, we've been working on that in New Zealand for years. We want that to happen. And then we said leveraging digital, because we know that technology is where the future is, but we don't want our kids to use the current technology. We want them to invent the new. We want them to be able to design the new. So pedagogy accelerated by technology. So those are the teacher competencies that we figured at the time we thought were going to be the most important to use. So we created some tools to help us to do that. We created a protocol to help us to design that asks a series of questions around those 4 areas. Then we created a rubric to use as a reflection tool, because the best learning happens when we reflect, and most of the time when we've finished our teaching, we're so exhausted, we're ready to go on to the next one. But what we've learned is that the moderation piece we do is not about the kids' work, it's about our own. It's about the teaching and learning part to see how we can get better at our pedagogy. So we figured that if we can create deep learning experiences, then we're going to get some more closer outcomes towards this particular way of thinking. We also created a teacher self-assessment that is just used in each school to help figure out what professional learning you need. Now, here in New Zealand, you probably have an opportunity to be able to say, okay, this is the needs we have, here's our evidence to say what we need, can we have the funding to do that, or can we have the people to help us to do that kind of work? Because you're in a sort of situation where I think at the moment where you can have some say in who you have. So you've got some experiences like that. Then you have student engagement. Sorry, I missed the arrow there. Once you've got all of that happening, you need the conditions to shift, because otherwise you can't do it. That all sounds great, eh? But then sometimes your conditions get in the way, so you can't do it. So we said, what are the school conditions that we need to have happening to enable deep learning to occur? What does it look like? Not what do we have to get rid of, what does it look like when it works? What does it look like when a cluster works together? What does it look like when the school system works well? And we aligned all of that to make it a coherent system. So we start looking at system, design and implementation, and student outcomes as a whole. Does that make sense? Haven't lost anyone yet? So we believe that once we described it, we talked about the conditions. So we're getting closer to having a systematic approach. So once we get the system conditions right, we look to the design, then we think about the outcomes, because we're looking at how we can engage, and we end up with the ability to get through to the end. Looks exceedingly complex, and I'm sorry if I hurt your brains doing it, but basically what it's about is saying that we are part of a system, we have to all fit together, but for the first time in my life, I've seen it as a whole picture. I can see how everything fits together, and all the tools we created make it work together. So in short, when I'm thinking about it, it really helps the teams to design and work together. It gives you a tool. So if you're trying to work as a cluster, there's a tool for you to help you to think. The benefit is it doesn't tell you what to do, it helps you to have a discussion. And the discussion is where the learning occurs. Then you say, where am I? And then you say, okay, so what evidence do I have for that? Why would I say that? And if you don't know, you go hunting for more evidence. So you're really starting to become very evaluative in the way you're thinking, but nobody is telling you that. You are figuring it out yourselves. And I talk about everyone's got to run their own gauntlet. Everyone's got to go through this themselves. Like, nobody is coming. No one's going to help you do this. No government's coming to make you do this. Nobody can help you except you and some tools to help make you think about it. And the other part is then teachers, you can support your teachers to do this by giving them the tools to think. I had one teacher say to me in the States, he said, so Joanne, you're talking about a bit of a transformation here, aren't you? I said, yes. And he said, actually, no, you're not. You're talking about a whole system revolution. And I said, yes, I am. We are talking not just a system shift. We're talking about a system revolution, because it's no longer designing before we meet our kids, no longer looking at what they need before we know them, no longer deciding what they need before they tell us. And the system has to fit them, so the kids come first. The company I own in the US is called The Learner First, for a reason. It's individualistic to that learner. So, another way of thinking about it is we use the collaborative cycle. We have learning progressions, we have learning design tools, and we have learning condition tools. So we have a process and we have tools. Process, tools. And then you can use them for yourselves. Now, every country that we work with uses these tools. They've translated them into their own languages, and they've made them their own, because the descriptions we say don't tell you what it looks like in your country. It's a broad description. You have to decide what it looks like in your country. You have to decide what indicators or what measures would help you make it make sense to you. So when we think about it as the clarity of learning goals, the 6 C's. When we're a deep learner, we know where we're going. We've got clarity of learning goals. 6 C's, they tell us. We've got precision in pedagogy. We know we have to have those 4 elements in all of our learning design, otherwise we're not encouraging our learners to become deep learners. We know we then have to have our school conditions, our district conditions. I said district, which you would use cluster here, and then our school conditions, and then that is all brought to life by the collaborative inquiry cycle. So I've shown you in 3 different ways the same kind of system to help with people who have different ways of thinking about things. But basically what we're saying is to become a deep learner, we're thinking about conditions, implementation and design, and then outcomes. What do we want? So let's look at the 6 C's. We start off very big. We say general to start with, and then we dig down into what they are. So the first 4, creativity, critical thinking, communication, and collaboration, have been around for 100 years, and we didn't make any difference with them. People talked about them a lot, and I've seen them since before the 21st century, and nothing really changed. The big difference, and Joanne McEachen and I talk about the catalytic C's, are character and citizenship. So character, inward facing. Who am I? Am I a good person? Can I learn how to learn? Do I have grit? Do I have tenacity? Can I handle it when someone gives me a hard time? When somebody doesn't agree with me, do I know how to handle it? Citizenship. Do I have empathy with other people? Can I walk a day in their shoes and actually act? So when I wrote the learning progressions, I started off with the first couple of columns are roughly know who you are, Next couple of columns are, how do I fit into the world? Next couple of columns, even though there's 5, but they kind of intervene. How are you going to contribute back? So call to action. What are you going to do once you know how to work in this particular way? So our 6 C's, and they're written in a way that is not prescriptive. They're talking about humanity and how we can be a person. Now, we had a look, and I want to acknowledge Chris Panther at Thorrington School. He had a look at your curriculum and your key competencies, which you've had for over 20 years, but we haven't measured them. So does that tell us they're important? So we just had a little look, and he had a look at putting it together and seeing whether or not they were aligned, and I mean, it's quite clear what you can see, how it's come together, and there's quite an alignment with what you're doing, surprisingly so. So it's not that it's not outside of your way of thinking already, it's something that you're already doing, so it'll be quite easily to have a look at the tools and align them for you as a system. And when you're going for things that count and for humanity, it's quite a different outcome that you're going for. We use them to assess, to start with, so where are you currently on the tools? And the kids do that too. Last week in Australia, I went to a couple of school visits, and I had a 6-year-old using the student-friendly versions stand there and tell me where he was on the critical thinking rubric, the learning progression, sorry, and I said, well, how do you know you're there? I just know I'm there. I said, how do you know that? I feel I'm there. I said, well, what tells you that? Do you feel you're there? And he said, well, I know myself. Do you know, as the person who helped write these things, it was like that was music to my ears, because he starts to think about that. Then I went to a high school, and they were doing it in the 8th grade, or year 8, and they were saying, they were doing it, they were using it to do their own goal setting, but it was goal setting for real stuff. It wasn't for how many maths checks you could get, it was actually about life. And they were saying, I said, so what's your justification for giving yourself that rating? They were able to articulate the evidence as to why they thought they were a good collaborator, and then their actions as to what they were going to be working on this term to be a better person and to be a better collaborator, and what they needed to work on next. Then I saw a 12th grade, or 12 students, they had made videos to show how Romeo and Juliet in this day and age, how it would have played out for them, around how they weren't collaborating with some other people, and what the outcomes were going to be. And what they talked about when they were giving their debrief was nothing to do with Romeo and Juliet, it was about how they all worked together in their collaboration. And what they learned, and one kid said it was just so bloody horrible because nobody listened to me. And then he said, but what I learned was what I did, and how I needed to be, and what I'm going to do next. So for me, hearing that as an author of some of this work was quite incredible, because I have written policy before and been into schools and never seen it play out. Yet every country I go to when I see this work in action, it's played out, because the kids are owning it, because the teachers have had to figure it out with the kids what it looks like. So let's take a quick look at one. I don't know if this is going to look. I don't know if you can see it, but let me just read out one of them for you. So at the proficient level, learners demonstrate a highly effective and synergistic approach to working interdependently in a way that not only leverages each member's strengths, but provides opportunities for each to build on those strengths and learn new skills. Does that look different than an A, or a B, or a C, or a 36%, or a pass or a fail? So what we ask is that you and your school would decide, what does that look like in your school? Once that's decided in your school, then you'd say, so what would tell us when our kids got there? And you decide. You decide that with your kids, you decide that with your parents, you decide that with your community. And the only thing the system would be interested in is, okay, how many people are moving along? You can still get that measurement at that top level, because the system still does have to know that they're getting a return on their investment. But the information you're giving them is richer, it's real, and it's about important stuff that's decided by the community. So let's think about, if we're looking at creative. So one of the 6 C's is creativity. So you've talked about you want to have creative leaders with flourishing futures. Well, let's start with the kids. Sometimes I use these when I'm working with schools or smaller groups individually. I use the learning progressions with adults first, especially for collaboration. And it's because they're not age-bound, you can use them from birth to death. And it's a really helpful tool just to have discussions for strategic planning, for staff meetings, etc. So we've described this as having an entrepreneurial eye for economic and social opportunities. Now, entrepreneurial doesn't mean money only. It means thinking about new markets, new ways of being, new ideas. like not limiting yourself. You want to generate novel ideas, new ways of thinking, new ways of being, and the leadership to turn those into actions. Where leadership sits in most of the progressions is in creativity. And there's a reason for that. We have to be creative if we're going to lead. We have to be able to take current policy and exploit the hell out of it to make it work for us. We have to take it and make it work for our kids. Otherwise, it's a waste of time. We have to then be able to turn it into action and make sure that what we're doing is giving us a return on what we're saying. So it fits into one of the 6 C's. It overlaps. There's pieces that go across it, but it's one way we can show we're becoming creative. So then once we've got that, remember I said we start with a general statement. Then we've broken it down into some dimensions, and the dimensions we have for this are leadership for action, economic and social entrepreneurialism, asking those right questions, because we know everybody has said so far the questions are really important, considering and pursuing novel ideas. I have to admit I didn't know I was creative until I left this country, and I met other people in the world, and I'd be sitting there and they'd say something, and it'd be an idea would come out, and another idea, and I'd think, oh, that's what we're like here in New Zealand and Australia. That's what we do. But that's not the same everywhere else. So let's keep that going. Let's keep getting those questions popping. And then how do we leverage digital to accelerate our pedagogy? So we do that. We figure out what do we think is important. This is what we thought at the time was important. Then we write it down in a much deeper way. We say, what does it look like when we're just figuring out who we are? What does it look like in the next bit? Understanding how we fit. And then when we do the call to action or how we can contribute back to humanity. So those are the things that we're thinking about all the time when we're writing these things. Now, you can write your own. What we've found is that countries starting this work, they love it because they don't have to do the groundwork. They can start to think about how would it look for them. And then when they're ready, they fly off and start doing their own to make it work. Now, when I talk about equity, I think about authentic mixed method assessment. Now, you might think this looks a little bit like, doing your moderation for national standards, but it is in a way, but it's not, because there's no that list on the left-hand side, it's not predetermined. It's what you choose it to be. The bit that's the most important, which we cannot lose, is the professional synthesis. If we lose that professional synthesis, we might as well get our robots in. Because everyone says to me, when you're doing this, do you get the AI to do it for you? And I said, no, not yet. Not until we've got humanity back in education. Because if we do that, then we're saying we're ranking, we're numbering, we're sifting, we're sorting. Because what I say is that for each student, the data is going to look different, and you're going to have to put weighting on it in a different way because you are the ones who know your kids. So for us to be equitable, we have to be honest. We have to have no high stakes. We have to have this about humanity and about how we help our kids to be the very best they can be so they can contribute. And it's not a pass or fail situation. And we can't do it if we don't tell the whole story. And I think about doctors. You run into your doctor, you trip up on the way, you drop your bag, it's raining, your hair's a mess, they take your blood pressure, what happens? It's high. They don't say straight away, based on one data point, right, you're going to have open heart surgery tomorrow. They say, how do you feel? And they believe you. Then they say, let's get some more evidence, let's get some more data. Then they synthesize that as a professional and then say, how about we do this? And they ask you, what do you think about that? Let's do that to kids. Let's ask them how they feel about that because it's about them. So we talk about self-assessment a lot. Let's do that to ourselves. Let's help ourselves do that. So when I think systemically, I think at different layers of the system, we need different pieces of information. Please excuse me that it says state at the top. Just change that to system for New Zealand because that's the country. So the country might need lots of different pieces of information because they've got to think about it from a government piece of vision. But a teacher needs different information. But the information I'd want the government to get would be based on the truth, based on everything we know about the kids. So the information they get is not the same. So for example, in the US at the moment, what the state is getting is the 3 pieces of data they're asking for is on track to graduate, discipline data, and attendance. And that's what the schools are judged on. They get the SAC, if they don't get good data. Right? So we're not going there here in New Zealand. What we want to do is to say, we can be trusted to use all that evidence base, and that's what we want to track. That's the measure we want to track. It's about all the rich information we have. We know we have to track something. No one piece of data is more important than the other. It's like an Australian said to me last week, well, we've got these big tests coming in, year 12 and 13 or 11 and 12. And I said, so what? One data piece. Don't give it any more weight than it needs, because if you do, you're going to suffer like the rest of America has. Don't do it. One piece of data. Don't give it any more weight than you need. Example of how you could think about it is, looking at Jimmy and Jenny. They've got some different ratings there. So if you look at them, we've looked at a creativity progression. I've also talked about a connection progression that we have, and you can have a look at that in some of the readings that we've got available. Self-understanding progression that talks about how you know yourself. We've given them some ratings. Teacher observation, there's a parent survey and a student self-assessment. Two very different kids. What do you notice about them? Bit like Lucas and Kaya. One's pretty good academically, one's pretty good in the soft skills, right? Jimmy's getting a C, Jenny's getting an A. I challenge you that we are doing them both a major disservice by giving them either of those ratings, because it's not true for either of them. Jenny is not an A. She needs help to develop herself as a person and to be competent at the 6 Cs. She's going to struggle when she gets older because she's going to go into a work situation where she might be bright, but she can't communicate, or she struggles. Jimmy, we're telling him he's a failure because he's getting a C, yet he's a really good communicator, collaborator. He's the kind of person we want to employ when he finishes school. So we're doing a disservice by giving kids ratings that mean nothing to them, so let's stop. Let's have the conversation without those letters. Let's talk about why they are where they are and get them to self-evaluate first and have that discussion. Think about the 4 elements of learning. For teacher design, thinking about that. So when we're doing our teacher design, the question was asked earlier around how do we as teachers get those skills? This is one of the ways to do it, because we have to learn to collaborate to do this moderation. So I know when you were moderating with the National Centres, I think you were moderating kids' work. Was that right? So this is moderating your own teachers' work. And some of the teachers who have been doing it, they're pretty frightened. I think, Julie, you were saying this morning that some of your work has gone through to the global moderation, and her teachers were really nervous about it. But now they're realizing they're getting feedback from countries around the world about their work. And they're getting information and hearing about what other people think about their design. And that's what we are. We're designers of learning. So big shout out to some of the schools who are here already in New Zealand doing this work. Holy Family Catholic, they have got a student volunteer army. This is the real work. There's math, science, reading, language, everything in here. They're doing some amazing stuff. They did random acts of kindness and clean up crabs. I mean, you can see what can happen in that space. Where's Rapalda School? I know she's here somewhere. Where is she? Yay, she's in the book too. Fabulous. If you want to go and visit a great school, go and have a look at that. Cultures and festivals. Some amazing work there where the grandparents came in, the kids came in, they taught the grandparents. When you're talking about a real life experience, when kids are teaching their grandparents, their community about what's going on, that's when we're starting to see the connections occur. Springlands School, young citizens of tomorrow have their priorities right. Let's listen to them and do what we can to ensure that they inherit a healthier planet than we now have. That's from a grandparent giving feedback to the kids. It's going on now. The beauty of the work we're doing in the moderation section is that we are spending the bulk of our time on the reflect and change part, so that when we design our next piece of learning, we know what to do. We know we have to change, because I know at the end of every sort of learning unit we're exhausted when we want to go on, but don't stop. That's the time when we're doing the most of the learning. So teachers look at this rubric, they look at their learning partnerships, they look at where they might be, and then they find evidence. And then they write down what that evidence is. They send that through to the moderators. The moderators have a look and they see if they agree. And they try and hunt for evidence too. And they talk about it being an evidence-based discussion. And you've got somebody from Finland talking to somebody from New Zealand, who's talking to somebody from Canada, who's talking to somebody from Australia, and they have the very different picture of what success looks like, trust me. But you start to get that inter-rater reliability that everyone thinks is so important, but it's on real live work, and it's that little data that counts. So there's not a graph in sight in this space, but the most learning I have ever heard in my life has been going on in these sessions. It's where you really start to get rid of what I call the imposter syndrome. Do you know what imposter syndrome is? It's where you think that everybody else knows more than you. Now, I experience that quite frequently. I work with Michael Fullan. I always think he knows way more than everybody in the world, and he does. But it's like you have to open up your mind and be open and brave and honest and say, yeah, I don't know that. And when I start doing this with teachers, it's the most humbling experience I have ever had, because teachers start to say, yeah, I don't know how to do that. And when teachers of 20 years start saying that, and they've been too scared to say they didn't know how to do it because they thought they were going to get in trouble, or they should have known it, it's the most magic experience in the world. Because that's what we need to do. We need to be honest with each other and say, yeah, I don't know how to do that, or I do know how to do that. And I could help with that if you could help me with this. So it's about honesty. So we really start to look into what we're doing. The next bit of the conditions, and this is the piece that I think might blow your minds, hopefully. I'm hoping it might. So, you know when you've got error, I heard somebody talking about error yesterday. Why wouldn't it be that you use a school conditions rubric that describes what the conditions are for a great school? Why can't you self-assess yourselves? Find your own evidence. Share that. We ask kids to self-assess. Why can't you self-assess yourselves? Why can't you be honest and say, yeah, that's where I am and that's what I need to do next? Then Nero might be able to come in and support whether that's correct or not. But partly what it is about we've got to all get honest with each other and say that's where we truly are as a system. So school conditions help us to figure out where we currently are as a school under 7 dimensions and where do we need to go next. Now, to me, that's a much more honest and reasonable way of being. A framework that we can all follow with the same language, that means the same thing to everybody once you discuss it as a group about what it looks like for success in your school. It means that you've got a common language, but the culture in your school is going to be different than the culture in your school. And that's actually okay. Nobody has to be the same. Nobody has to wear a dress like this. But I am, because I have to tell you why, because it's Trelise Cooper and she's a very famous Kiwi creative person. So I wanted to represent that. But if you do need to show graphs, you can. This is a multi-year conditions ratings for schools over a period of time, and they've shown how they've shifted. Now that's the same school over a period of time, so you have got data if you need to show data. Simple as that, but that's based on some really rich discussions and stuff that I'd call real. Not just a pass-fail, tick the box, but hours and hours and hours of discussion and shift and change and thinking. Now the next bit, which I really like, is you guys are trying to work in clusters, right? Now the hard thing in New Zealand, one of your system conditions, which is a challenge, and I'll be blunt as about this, is that you are paid by bums on seats. And it creates a bit of a challenge because you want to have more kids in your school. Now I did it too. That doesn't mean it's a very conducive environment for sharing. So partly, I don't know how to fix that, I have no idea. I'm just pointing it out that that might be an issue. So partly when you're working in a cluster, how do you know how to work together that it's going to be safe for you? So we've described how it would look in a cluster situation, so how you could work like that, and then there's a way you could figure it out how to make it work. So it's a safe way without anybody else telling you what to do, but a general description that you and your cluster could figure out how to make it work. The only way to go, and you heard Tony Wagner say it this morning, is to work together. You'll hear me say it, you'll hear Michael say it, you'll hear every person up here saying it, that you cannot do it alone anymore. I could sit by myself and make up some great stuff, but it's just nowhere near as effective anymore, and I don't even like working by myself anymore. I need other people to spark with. So to work as a cluster is the only way ahead, and however you do it, find a way to do it. If it's not working for you right now, figure out a way. Maybe use one of these tools like that to get some evidence, to talk to the ministry about how you would want to do it if it's not working for you. But when you have a conversation with each other, have the evidence. Have something to have that discussion with, and be proactive about what you're trying to ask for. Again, if you want to have some evidence and you need a graph, easy to do, but based on real stuff. My point about saying a lot of this is that you can do what you need to do now. You don't have to wait. Andy Hargraves and Michael Fullen talk a lot about leadership from the middle. You are the middle. As I said earlier, governments can't do it. They are not in the classroom with you. I heard the minister speak yesterday and he was pretty genuine. It sounded like he really genuinely wants to get some stuff done. And if you guys are willing to do it too, then this is going to whip up. This will be an amazing, amazing few years for you. You can do it now, and what you can do is start making those steps. You don't have to wait for permission, because you've got 38 schools here who are already doing it, and they're doing a really good job. And they can talk about it in a really interesting way. You have Kahukura Cluster in Christchurch who have presented over in Vancouver, representing Aotearoa, and they also presented last week in Queensland. So you've got people in this country who are becoming good at this work already, so you don't need to have people coming in from other countries to do it. You've got people here who know what they're doing already. Some leadership for action tips. Put deeper learning over everything you do. And when I say deeper learning over everything you do, conditions, design and implementation, and outcomes of the 6 C's. Everything you do, just think about it. Then ensure you're not leading alone. Hold hands. I talk about when you put your head above the parapet by yourself, it's going to get shot. But if you all stand in a line, you have all of you standing above the parapet, it's not going to get shot. You're not all going to get shot at once. It's just not possible. Okay? And you have to model risk-taking. You have to fail. Like, I've failed several times in my life, more than I want to admit. But you have to say you've done it. And you have to be okay with it. It's kind of embarrassing sometimes. But, you know, I wouldn't be here unless I'd failed miserably, truly. And you've got to support that play. We talk about innovation, but then we do something wrong, it's so let play happen. Question everything in the light of impact on learners. What difference is it going to make for them? And make sure you go all the way to measured outcomes. Don't start the year with this passion, excitement, yeah, I'm going to do this. By halfway through the year, I'm exhausted enough. We'll pick that up again next year. Or don't start this journey. Actually, that's my big warning. Don't start this journey and then stop, because otherwise you're doing more damage to kids and yourselves and your staff than you need to do in overall and total. So for me, measuring human return is really the capacity to measure what we give back to society. It's not about anything other than that, and it's at the intersection of deeper learning outcomes. We don't have a choice but to do this anymore, people. I think we're at the stage where I've heard it from all of you, you need something now to move on to. This is a way that you can move forward. It's an option for you. It is not by any means anything we would say do it if you don't want to do it. We only say to people do it if you want to work hard, because it's not easy work, it's hard work. So my so whats. None of us are getting out of this life alive. None of us. So whatever we do, let's make it count. And I know that this work has changed my life, and I hope it can change yours as well. Equal treatment leads to inequitable outcomes. Everything we do must be designed for the learner, the person, the teacher, the school, the region, the country. Deeper learning has to be measured by the outcomes that matter, not the stuff we're doing at the moment. It's got to be the stuff that actually counts for humanity. Because when I'm old, I don't want somebody who can add up my weight. I want somebody who can look after me and give me a cuddle. This might hurt. Individual forms of assessment, we don't need it anymore. It shouldn't be measured on the individual acquisition of knowledge. What we want to do is measure what we contribute collectively together. So let's stop thinking about individual attainment and what can we do collectively as a group, and think about humanity. Deeper learning does not do human division. We are all in this together. We need to work together. We are about humanity. And as I say, none of us are getting out of this alive, so we have to do this together. There is no other way. The favourite part for every speaker. A couple of books available. I didn't do what Mr. Fox did and get caught at Auckland Airport. I bought order forms. So they're available at Core Education Stand 44. And if you want any more information about joining NPDL or you want to talk with me, I'll be there for an hour or so. Love to talk with you about it. And also happy to have emails and contact. I love getting little questions and things like that. Next book, When Will We Ever Use This, is coming out, and that's about Kaya and Lucas and Ms. Melda and Ms. Monica. And you can imagine what it's going to be about. When will we ever use this? We have two little deep learning labs coming up, one in the US on the 16th and 17th of April. If you do want to come, let me know. I'll be hosting it, so I'd love you to come. We'll also have some speakers, hopefully from New Zealand, coming too, so it'll be great. Also, Core Education will be hosting the New Zealand DLL. And I just want to finish with one little quick video from an Australian girl who was on the panel that closed the conference last week that we were at. She talked about the stuff that I've kind of talked about today, about becoming who you are.
Today, but more that I came in and I saw a huge group of people that really care. And I'm so used to, you know, growing up and all my friends going, oh, the teachers just don't care. Like, you know, they're just there, they're just doing it, it's their job. And then when you walk in, you see so many people that are doing the right thing, not because it's their job, because you guys aren't necessarily paid to be here, but because you care about the education of your students. So thank you from, you know, all the kids, because I really do appreciate that. And I think seeing the commitment to learning as well, changing form from just being getting an A, getting a D, getting a C, getting an E, whatever you get, to the journey that you take to becoming who you are when you leave high school, rather than it being a university entrance, creating people that we can be proud of in our communities. So just was really awesome for me to see everybody here and caring. It was awesome. Well, today.
So my final thoughts are, who are you? How do you fit into the world? And how will you contribute back? Thank you.